Well, I hate to keep banging on about it, but the builders are still here, and that's not my worst sound problem today. My worst sound problem today happened this morning when I went to film this video for the first time, and well, basically I've got a new microphone, and it's the first microphone I've ever had that's got an on switch. You can probably see where this is going. Anyway, as you can imagine, I was thrilled when I found that footage. Right, so this video is all about helping beginner photographers. I was asked the other day what settings a beginner should use on their camera in order to help get better photos. And I don't really know of any settings that will guarantee you better photos. What I do know is that outside of settings, there are plenty of things you can do with your camera to ensure that you get better photos. Okay, tip number one is to isolate your subject. Now, there are a few ways you can do this. You can do it with exposure. If you've got like really dark shadows or really light highlights, you can use those to sort of really frame your subject. You can do it with aperture. So if your camera has manual controls, you can throw open the aperture really wide so only your subject is in focus. That helps isolate your subject too. Or you can do tip number two, which is really the same point, to be honest. I don't know why I've made it tip 2. So there's a famous photography quote, I can't remember who said it, but it goes something like this. If your photo's not good enough, you're not close enough. But there's a few different interpretations of it. My interpretation is that you don't need to include everything. So for example, say you're outside the Manchester Library, as I was this morning, and I wanted to get a photo of the Manchester Library because it's quite a cool looking building. The trouble with trying to take a photo of the whole thing is that you've got like power lines across it, you've got people walking across, you've got shadows that fall on some parts of the building, not others, and it doesn't often give you an attractive image. It doesn't really do your subject justice. So what I like to do is just get closer and not worry about including everything, just get details, which is basically isolating your subject, which is basically point number 1. Tip number 3 is to shoot really low or really high. Now I'm sure you'll have been to some tourist spots at really busy times, and if you have, you'll have seen that there are loads of tourists there and they're taking photos either like this if their camera doesn't have a viewfinder, or like this if the camera does have a viewfinder. That's not really a good demonstration, because what I'm actually demonstrating is someone doing it at eye level, stood up. And the problem with doing that is that unless you're really zoomed into something or you've got a wide angle lens on, the photo that you're taking will look probably roughly the same as what you'd have seen if you were there with your bare eyes. Which doesn't really sound like an issue, but you're missing a massive opportunity to capture something different from what the human eye would usually see. And one of the ways to do that is to shoot from a different perspective than sort of stood up eye level. So yeah, you can try and put your camera on the floor, or you can try and put it up super high, or you can shoot from the hip. That's a popular one, shooting from the hip. Tip number 4. I don't particularly like this one actually, only because of its name. It's called the rule of thirds, and well, in photography and in any art, I don't think there are any rules. So it should be more of like a guideline, really. The guideline of thirds. Yeah, so this one, if you've used your iPhone or your camera or whatever, you might have noticed sometimes that on the screen there's like 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines. The screen is basically split into thirds. And if you've ever used those for composition, you might have noticed that your photos look quite nice. So for example, if you line up your subject along one of those 2 vertical lines, rather than right in the middle, sometimes it can help your photo look a bit more interesting. And the same goes for the horizontal lines too. If you're taking a photo of a horizon and you line it up either on the top third line or the bottom third line, often that can look a little bit more interesting than if your horizon is just right in the middle of the shot. Don't really know why that is. And tip number 5 is hassle-free focus. One mistake I see a lot of beginners making is they'll miss a lot of the photos they want because they'll try and focus and take the shot at the same time. And usually when you're a beginner, you don't have a camera that's got the best focusing system in it. So a focus might be a little bit slower than what you need to capture the photo. You can solve this in a few ways. Say for example, you want a photo of a moving car or a person, and you know exactly where your subject is going to cross into the frame. You can focus in that area either by half pressing down the shutter or manually focusing, and then when they come past, you don't need to worry about focusing, you can just take the shot. Doing that will increase your keeper rate no end. Also, one setting actually that I would recommend from time to time, if your camera has got manual controls, is to set your aperture to f8. That means that if you do miss your focus, your subject probably will still be in focus, because f8 is quite a narrow aperture. So yeah, that's 5 tips. Hopefully that was useful. If you've got any other tips for beginners or any questions, just leave a comment below and I'll try and get back to them. One bonus tip actually is, if you are a beginner and therefore you won't be taking photos all the time, One really, really important thing that I noticed, and other people I know that have noticed when they began taking photos, is it was best to always put your camera batteries on charge as soon as you get in back home with your camera, because the next time you want to go and take photos, you might have forgotten to charge your batteries and it might be a spur of the moment thing, and you'll run out of batteries and you won't be able to take photos. And all of these things that I've said and spoken about, they all need practice. And if you're not practicing, you're not going to get better photos. So yeah, charge your batteries when you get home.